Welcome back to the Exhausted docu-series. Today we've got some important things to cover.
One of the main things we've been hearing about from our experts is adrenal and hormone health.
May sound a bit sciencey to some, but we've got it in plain speak. These are the body's backup currency to help shift energy around and make ends meet metabolically. It's important stuff.
Things are supposed to work like a symphony, but the ways we've been living, we're playing off key. All the toxins and stressors, day after day, it's just too much pressure on our endocrine systems.
Today, we're going to bring this issue to light and give you some solutions to help remedy the problem.
Healthy energy economics. This means burning food efficiently instead of squeezing energy from the adrenals. Overtax the adrenals, then all our other hormones get squeezed and depleted. Not the way to fight exhaustion. Pedram is now going to introduce some specialists to talk about our adrenals and sex hormones and how they in turn influence our energy levels.
Our bodies have checks and balances designed to help tune energy up and down as needed. This works well until we've overtaxed these systems. Our endocrine systems can get compromised and we begin to see issues with a variety of hormones. It often starts with cortisol, but then it impacts our testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, and other hormones up or downstream. Let's examine.
Hormones play an enormous role in fatigue, whether it's your testosterone is too low, and we have to figure out why is it too low. Do you have low cholesterol, that you don't have the building blocks to make testosterone? Do you have an aromatase problem where you have an enzyme taking your testosterone and turning it into estrogen? So we have to figure out, okay, before we just give you more testosterone for your energy production, why? Why do we need to do that? And if I give you more testosterone and you just actually take it down that aromatase enzyme, you're going to make more estrogen and you're not going to get more testosterone out of it. So we kind of need to know that before, and it's good to run a Dutch or some kind of hormone test that we know what all of these levels are doing in real time. So yes, looking at testosterone is great. Looking at estrogen, progesterone are also really helpful for women, especially progesterone for how well they're sleeping at night. There's certain forms of progesterone. We want to make sure they have plenty of that so they're getting really deep restorative sleep at night.
In my office, the number one concern that patients have is fatigue. Hormones and adrenals are a huge, huge piece of that. And especially the older you get, adrenal-wise, I call it adrenal dysfunction. Your adrenals are what? The size of walnuts, and they sit right here on top of your kidneys, and they shoot out cortisol and epinephrine and norepinephrine and all the adrenal hormones. Whether it's good or bad stress, they're going to shoot those out. It could be a baby or a marriage or a divorce or a new job. I mean, that you're still going to be shooting out. I think that your adrenals do get a little, I hate to use the word fatigued, but they just don't function as well as they used to. So people may not wake up as well as they used to in the morning, right? They may not pop right out of bed in the morning, and they may not get going till around noon, right? And they feel pretty good at noon, and then they crash in the afternoon, and then they pop back up in the evening after dinner. We call it wired but tired, right? That is classic adrenal dysfunction right there. They're just not firing on all 10 cylinders there. It's a huge piece of fatigue.
Well, adrenal fatigue is a common term these days, and it's used by natural doctors to describe this overall sense of lack of energy and not being able to make it through the day without a stimulants or a nap, and then not being able to sleep at night. The adrenal glands secrete epinephrine, which is a sympathetic hormone that drives stress. When you're driving down the street and that ball bounces out in front of you and you slam on the brakes and all of a sudden you're breathing hard and you're hyper aware, it doesn't matter what you were thinking about the moment before, all of a sudden you're focused on that situation. That's epinephrine. So that's rapid acting, and that's the run away from the tiger hormone. Cortisol is the ongoing stress maintenance remedy. That's the main anti-inflammatory mechanism in the body, and those are sort of like, again, the gas and the brakes in your car. The epinephrine is the gas driving you to save your life. or to respond to some crisis, the cortisol is suppressing the damage from that. So most people have their adrenal hormones pushed forward in the day. That is, their awakeness hormones, they're largely produced by the adrenals, are not really cranked up until the middle of the morning. So they haul themselves out of bed at 6 o'clock because they have to be at work, but they're not really awake. Their body still is in sleep mode in terms of these adrenal hormones, and then in the middle of the day it starts to crank up. But now that you're fully awake, it continues throughout the day, and it's supposed to wind down, sometime between sunset and bedtime, but it doesn't. It just continues. So then the sleepiness hormones are not secreted until well past bedtime. Also, most people's hormone cycle is kind of flattened. So the amount of sleep hormone, which is mainly melatonin, that's secreted is not enough to really put people into deep sleep. And the amount of awakeness hormone, mainly cortisol, is also not secreted adequately to really wake people up. So through some kind of strategy of lifestyle adjustment, natural medicine, we have to push that back and then enhance the peaks more so that people are producing enough melatonin at night to go to sleep instead of thrashing around for 2 hours before they fall asleep, and likewise during the day.
Hormones obviously affect our mood and our energy. What triggers them? How does it start, and how does this play out?
Your gut affects your adrenals. Adrenals affect the thyroid. Thyroid affects the hormones. It kind of works from the basement up. And especially women, we go through these hormonal changes right at puberty, and then we go through changes in menopause, and then, or perimenopause, and then menopause. And so we're constantly having these hormone fluctuations, and it's so important. I don't think that they're looked at very often. Your hormones, your testosterone is important for your energy, and estrogen has got hundreds of functions in your body. Your brain and your energy is one of those functions of estrogen, and progesterone and DHEA, pregnenolone, the mother hormone, right? That all hormones are made from cholesterol, and then they break down and make pregnenolone, and then it goes down there into progesterone and all. So adrenals and hormones are huge with chronic fatigue or exhaustion. And then you add the thyroid on there, and it's a whole nother, then you have your whole endocrine system right there. And when it's not functioning properly, you're not functioning properly. You can barely get out of bed.
Adrenal fatigue is really just sort of a code word for this overall dysregulation of the endocrine system. There really is no adrenal fatigue per se. Your adrenals don't just conk out of nowhere. Your endocrine system is like a hormonal symphony with all your endocrine glands starting from the bottom, the gonads, the pancreas, the adrenals, thyroid and parathyroid, pituitary and pineal, again arranged in priority order, with the more important the gland that produces the hormones is, the further up the body it is. So your pituitary, called the master gland, it does a whole load of things. It regulates everything below it. And at the bottom is the poor sex hormones who just get pounded on by everybody up above. Do your job. I'm trying to. Do it better. Do it faster. I don't have anything to do it with. I can't make any more hormone. Well, that's not my problem. That's your problem. And they're all screaming at each other. So it's like a symphony without a conductor. It's chronic endocrine dysregulation. That's what most people have. So at any given time, depending on the specialist that they see, they may be diagnosed as having a sex hormone imbalance. They might be diagnosed as having cortisol issues or thyroid hormone. And that's usually handled by focusing on these individual glands like a mechanic relates to a car. We're not a car. We don't have interchangeable parts that you can just repair one piece. The whole thing has to function in a cooperative way. Nothing wrong with treating those glands individually, but we can't really individually target them. We don't have tools that will only affect one specific gland. We have a lot of great tools that help re-regulate the entire system. And then when we get those micronutrients in, magnesium, zinc, the kinds of things that the body needs, then it all lines up and things work well.
If you look at hormones, you can also see if you balance your estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, you're going to have more energy, right? You're going to have more usable energy. You're going to sleep better at night. You're going to have more resources to show up. And then you want to look at that in terms of, okay, what's your cortisol doing? So that's why, again, I love the Dutch test, because we can look at it all together, all on a certain day of the cycle for a woman. And a man, we can look any time of the month. But we're still looking at estrogen and progesterone and testosterone for a man, right? And cortisol and melatonin, right? So we can look at all these hormones and see, okay, where are we off in our relationship to one another, as well as do we have some of the hormones that are depleted that really need to come back up in order to be in balance and ratio to one another?
When I talk about hormonal imbalances, I'm talking more about adrenal, thyroid, and sex hormones in particular. The biggest ones are adrenal and thyroid. Now, with sex hormones, if a woman is going through perimenopause, menopause, and they've got fatigue, she's got fatigue, there can be sex hormones related to that. Like she could have maybe some low testosterone or some other imbalances. So that's one of the hormonal kind of groups that we can look at and certainly test for. But the bigger ones are adrenal and thyroid. I see those more frequently. And with thyroid, we see low energy, and especially when it comes with other symptoms like dry skin, that's the skin symptom that I look for, and then also constipation, hair loss, and some of these other symptoms to look for. And you have that kind of package together, then I would get your thyroid tested. And to do thyroid testing, if you go in to see a conventional doctor, they're probably just going to run TSH. But I would say in addition to TSH, you want to run free T3, free T4, and thyroid antibodies. So you want to do a full thyroid panel to get more information. Because here's the thing is, you want to catch these root causes early before they actually go out of the normal range. You want to look for optimal ranges with this blood work. You could get any doctor to run these for you, but you really want to pay attention to the optimal numbers.
A lot of people are dealing with hormone imbalances in part because of the phase of life they're going through. So whether that's for women every month, that may be happening, or during perinatal, prenatal, postnatal, that's going to happen. Some kind of disruption occurs during perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. That's also happening as a part of what happens with life, but it's amplifying actually what's been going on all the time. So it's that those hormones are actually getting our attention for what really wasn't working anyway. We just got lucky. So what we know happens during those times for a woman, more so than for a guy. So it still happens, but less often, and he's got less to deal with, is that we're fluctuating up and down, and the testosterone, the estrogen, the progesterone get our attention. But what's always been there, and what will always be there no matter how old you are or what gender you are, is cortisol and insulin. And those are the two that cause the most damage. And we need a little cortisol. It's not totally negative. We need it for energy, but it's like a violin. So if you have strings on a violin that are too lax, you have no music. And if they're too tight, they're going to break. So there's an optimal level where you make great music, and there's an optimal level for cortisol where we've got plenty of energy, but we're not super stressed and or crashing because we've been at that place where we've been super stressed for so long. So those kinds of interactions with hormones are a big play as far as why we've got so many issues. And when cortisol is problematic, so is insulin, and it wreaks havoc with our blood sugar. So it's where cravings come in, where weight gain comes in, where depositing belly fat, which becomes a bigger heart health risk, comes into play. And now we've got just a vicious cycle going all over again.
For someone fighting exhaustion and suspecting hormonal imbalance, can you talk more about what tests they should expect to run?
TSH is the one, that thyroid stimulating hormone. That's the one that doctors typically run. And there's a huge range for TSH. And really there's a more specific range for optimal. But you don't just look at that number. You also want to look at that in association with these circulating thyroid hormones. So free T3 and free T4 are the circulating thyroid hormones. And one is more of an active form, but they're both important. And I think doctors sometimes will run one or not the other. You could also do reverse T3. There's some other ones you can run, but I think those are the most important ones. And then thyroid antibodies will help you determine if you have a you have an autoimmune thyroid condition. And so that requires a little bit of a different treatment to help support the body and the thyroid function. Because if you have an autoimmune condition, that means that your immune system's actually attacking, your body's actually attacking your thyroid. So you need to provide additional support for that.
Find a provider who will check your labs for you, though. That's what, people don't know it's their adrenals that are causing them problems, or they don't know that their hormones are out of balance, or they don't know that their thyroid is not functioning properly if you don't have a provider that actually checks those things for you or asks those questions for you. You're just a young mom of 3 kids. Of course you're tired and you work full time. That's not an answer. I tell my patients that every day. I work for you. And if you don't like the answers that I'm giving you, then you need to find a new provider. You need to fire me and find somebody else. And, if the patient doesn't know, they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So you need a provider who's going to check those things. And that's where you get into lab testing, right? Looking at your adrenals. Saliva test is how we use, that's how I use it in my office. You can also use urine, but we use a saliva test, looking at your adrenals, seeing do you have a flat, adrenal pattern, or are you running on adrenaline? Are you just high? My cortisol's probably through the roof right now because I've been up since 3 o'clock this morning and I've been going on adrenaline getting here. And then looking at your hormones, do you have too much estrogen, not enough progesterone? Do you have estrogen dominance, right? Are you going through perimenopause and no progesterone, which is your calming hormone, right? Which decreases the PMS symptoms and all those things that start to act up when you're going through hormone dysfunction. Do you not have any testosterone or DHEA? Those are really attributed to fatigue as well. And then looking at the whole thyroid also, right? Is your thyroid sluggish, not optimal? We're looking for optimal, not normal. And if you're just normal, you're going to be fatigued. So we need to work on getting optimal on all of your hormones.
Let's talk prevention. Day to day, what do you advise people do to support their hormone health, stability, and balance?
Good things to do as far as, how do I rebalance my hormones and how do I do it naturally? So let's say, hormone replacement therapy is certainly an option and someone may want to go that way. But if you want to take the steps to say, what can I do before I get there? Or if I want other alternatives, what do I have to look at? Your lifestyle habits, the type and the timing of both the exercise that you do, the food that you eat, and the lifestyle habits you have. For instance, deciding when is it time to go to bed? When is it time to wake up for me to optimize those hormones with exercise? I'll start there because that's the easy one for me. Ideally, to work with your cortisol, we're going to have you do intense exercise earlier in the day. And we're going to keep the light late. So intense early, light late. You're working with your cortisol levels. Ideally, they should wake you up. Cortisol should be highest at 8 a.m. and lowest at 2 a.m. And when you've got those flip-flop, that's when you're staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. wondering, why can't I sleep? So if you optimize your exercise, that will be one way to support yourself with better cortisol levels as opposed to fighting it. And looking at insulin levels, depending on what's happening for you. So you've got to take into consideration, what are the signs and the symptoms that I'm experiencing? After a meal, am I feeling dizzy, lightheaded? Am I feeling hungry within an hour after eating? It's a sign that your blood sugar levels and therefore your insulin, which comes in to fix things and fix blood sugar levels, are not working out correctly. So eating smaller meals throughout the day for someone who's got blood sugar level problems, who's tanking and not feeling good, can be the right way to give them energy throughout the day and have a little bit more stable blood sugar. Long duration, that's not the goal. We want to learn how to stabilize that and get them back to, let's have 3 meals, let's not eat between. But short term, that may be the way to stabilize cortisol and stay away from the negative impact on adrenals.
Maca's really well known for its ability to balance hormones. And it's a food, right? It's a kind of radish that people eat in Peru. So it's not like you're going, hey, you're going to be on something and we don't exactly know what this is going to do. People eat it their entire lives in Peru. I like that one. I like ashwagandha a lot. I like certain medicinal mushrooms, in particular cordyceps sinensis, also called caterpillar fungus, right? It doesn't grow in caterpillars anymore. That's not the way they do it. But that's its origin, is that this is the kind of fungus that would get into a caterpillar and kind of eat its way through the caterpillar and then suddenly send up a stalk. And the Chinese thought, oh, this is amazing, right? And it only grows at high altitude, so only the emperors who could send their laborers up there to get it had access to it. Now anybody can get cordyceps, So I tend to use more general adaptogens. Again, ashwagandha, sweat of a horse, I think is the name is reminiscent of that. That's a really good thing for people to use who are wired and tired, because it's calming, but at the same time energizing.
If I think about energy, I'm going to give you a couple categories of what I might use to treat. Number one would be hormonal adrenal support. So, and the thyroid axis can be in that as well. Some people have thyroid dysfunction, some people just have adrenal dysfunction, some people have both. But some sort of endocrine support. And in that sense, you can have things like tyrosine and iodine, which are precursors of T3 and T4 for the thyroid hormone. Things like selenium, which help autoimmune thyroiditis. And then things like adrenal glandulars, herbals like ashwagandha, rhodiola, ginseng. All of those things tend to be really supportive of the endocrine system and the adrenal thyroid axis. Adrenals and thyroids I think of as two yoked horses. So if you have the thyroid not working, it's going to pull back on the adrenals. And if you have the adrenals not working, it may affect the thyroid. So when you're thinking clinically, you need to think about both of them and make sure you're supporting both so that they have optimal energy, because those two are key for metabolic function and for energy.
Can you tell us what adaptogens are and how they help balance our hormones and what they do for our adrenals?
What is an adaptogen? An adaptogen is something that either boost things when they're run down or calms things when they're overexcited or overstimulated. So they normalize, they bring things back to normal. In Western medicine, that's mind-boggling, right? In Western medicine, we don't really have any notion of what an adaptogen might be, right? But in traditional Chinese medicine, and like I said, in indigenous medicines all over the world, people go, of course we do this. A really good example of adaptogenic herb is Astragalus membranaceus. So Astragalus, again, is something in traditional Chinese medicine. People put it in the soup, give it to the kids during the winter to help make their immune system work better. But it's also anti-inflammatory, right? So it can be a bit of a stimulant. It can activate the immune system, but can also cool it off a little bit.
And then we go to things like nutritional precursors for energy. And when I think about this, I think about what does the mitochondria need? Mitochondria are the storehouses for the Krebs cycle and the cellular process of making fuel, as we talked about. But nutrients such as lipoic acid, N-acetylcysteine, vitamin C, coenzyme Q10, and just other basic things like methylated B vitamins are critical for that energy process. So I want to make sure either test or make sure they have all of the raw materials for them to actually create energy. And then other herbals can be used. We talked about stress. If stress is an issue, I always want to know, are they too high cortisol, too high stress, or are they completely crashed? Because there's different herbs depending on if you are high cortisol and you want to bring it down, like an adaptogen, or if you're low cortisol and you want to support it. So things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, ginseng are pretty adaptogenic either way. Things like phosphatidylserine and magnolia bark and valerian are more calming when you're in a stress response and you have too much cortisol and you want to calm your system or fall asleep. So it kind of depends on what's going on, but those are typically the things that I'm using.
I think adaptogens are probably the number one thing you want to use for somebody who's chronically run down. I mean, let's say I see a patient who's an executive, comes in and says, I'm going all the time, I'm not getting enough sleep, I come home from work at 8, 9 o'clock at night, and then my kids want me, and, eat a quick bite, have some wine, and I'm like, well, what you need to do is retire, right? You need to get a beach house in Hawaii, and you'll be fine, right? Or go do a yoga retreat in the Yucatan for a month. And so my point is, the person's going to say, I can't do that, right? This is the life that I'm living right now. What can you give to help me get through the next couple of years until I can retire, until I can do that? So I think an adaptogen is the perfect thing for somebody like that. And, you know, one of my top choices that I haven't mentioned yet is rhodiola rosea, right? Rhodiola has been shown to help people deal with stress. The studies were done in Russia where they had students that were getting ready for exams and they gave them the rhodiola and they found that their cortisol levels didn't go up quite as high, you know, that their adrenal glands just seemed to deal with the stress better. You know, that's an example of probably a dozen of these compounds that are found around the world. I think they're generally safe. I've never seen side effects from them. Different people respond in different ways, of course, and they're not stimulants. So caffeine is not an adaptogen, right? Caffeine is a stimulant. For people that can tolerate caffeine, it can be wonderful, right? And there's actually evidence that caffeine can be quite beneficial for athletic performance, et cetera. But for the 45% of the population that doesn't metabolize it well, it can be harmful to the heart. So, you know, that's a stimulant. By an adaptogen, I mean, again, something that regulates the system better. And part of the reason that I think we're all so fatigued as a society is that we're really dysregulated. We're just going all the time, and we don't ever get the kind of breaks that we need.
Optimal hormone function being like the strings of a violin. This really resonated with me. It's all about being tuned correctly versus cranked up all the time. Good lab tests can help us determine where the issues are, and then the use of nutrition and adaptogens can make all the difference. The moral of the story is find out where you're depleted and start correcting the problem. But know that if you're living an unsustainable lifestyle, something else is going to break. No amount of caffeine or hormone cream will make up for poor lifestyle. Here's some of the key takeaways from this act. Hormone issues like low testosterone can come from low cholesterol, excess aromatizing, or other root causes. Progesterone deficiency can lead to poor sleep quality. Pregnenolone is considered the mother hormone that helps build the other sex hormones. DHEA is another hormone closely tied to fatigue. Chronic endocrine dysregulation is a better term for what we're suffering from versus adrenal fatigue. To test for optimal thyroid function, make sure you include free T3, free T4, and thyroid antibodies. Maca, ashwagandha, cordyceps, rhodiola rosea, ginseng, and other adaptogens are all helpful in supporting adrenal and hormone health. Some nutritional precursors for energy are NAC, methylated B vitamins, coenzyme Q10, and vitamin C.
Let's take a moment and help you decide which package is right for you. They all come with the videos, audios, and transcripts, and you can elect to get the director's cut and several other bonus resources, including our comprehensive adaptogen guide. Our team has put together all the research for you, and we've vetted the best remedies available for your success. You'll save hundreds of hours of research and know you're in good hands when you purchase this series. Our model is to broadly help millions of people with our series, and how we fund our projects is through series sales, subscriptions, and additional resources that have been curated to serve you. Please choose one of the packages right now. You'll be happy you did. The world we live in isn't making any of this easier. There's more stress and strife to deal with on a daily basis.
Just turn on the news on any given day and your blood pressure and cortisol levels can go up within minutes.
It's hard to look away, but the constant barrage of bad news and calamity can get us to shut down energy production on a cellular level.
How we perceive world and life events will have a dramatic impact on our physiology in a very real way. Our hormones change with stress, and our ability to brush things off versus internalize them can make or break us.
It's really a matter of survival. We need to learn to calm down, or else we're in trouble.
Stress kills us, pure and simple. There are multiple layers to our endocrine system, and it plays like a symphony when things are going well. And when they're not, well, you can see that all around you. Nick is going to introduce our next segment where our experts further peel back the layers on the impact of stress on our hormones.
Stress can be a good thing when we're running for our lives, but not if we live that way all the time. We can use it to advance our careers and win a race, harnessing it for positive adaptation. But when most of the signaling is negative, it leads to breakdown and premature aging. It leads to exhaustion. In this next act, we examine stress's effect on our hormones, blood sugar levels, and overall energy metabolism.
So when people are thinking about the stress response, I mean, that term itself throws me off a little bit because it's not really a response. Fight and flight are reactions that we have. And it may seem like that's just semantics, but I think that's a really important clarification. That reactions are hardwired, more primal ways of dealing with the circumstances in our lives. Our responses require whole brain processing, which means we have to have the energy to get all of that information flowing from the bottom of the brain to the top of the brain to be our full human selves in the moment. So one of the things I think is really helpful is to identify what are the stress reactions and what do they mean and how could we actually use them to fuel some sort of positive change. So if we look at recent research, there's about 6 primary stress reactions. There's the fight or flight reactions, which are fueled primarily by adrenaline. Very much short-term, in the moment, doesn't stay in the body for a very long period of time, meant to move us into taking some sort of action. Then, if we don't take action, if we choose not to take action, if we don't have control and we can't take some sort of positive action, then over time we'll shift into this second type of stress pattern, which has to do with the freeze or faint pattern. And that one is fueled primarily by cortisol, keeping in mind that there's always a dance of chemicals and things happening in the brain and the body. But cortisol's role is to really prepare us for a longer term threat. And cortisol does a lot of things that are very necessary. So we don't want to make cortisol the bad guy in the story, but we want to understand why is it there and what is it trying to move me towards so that we can better listen to our stress reactions. So in that case of freeze or faint, it's more of a low energy state of conservation where we really need to take time to nourish our system, to recharge our battery. Whereas in a fight or flight reaction, we may want to go to the gym and work out. We may want to problem solve. We really want to use that high energy state to mobilize some sort of change in our life that's going to make circumstances better. But I think if we really listen to what's at the core of those stress reactions, we can then customize and personalize a stress solution or some sort of approach that's going to fit what our brain and body is really trying to tell us.
So the parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest part of your nervous system. It's the involuntary part of your nervous system that kind of kicks in and makes sure your heart's beating, you're doing all the digestive work. And it's just helping make sure that all your organs are doing what they need to do. You're breathing, all of these things. When you go into sympathetic, and that's fight or flight or freeze, most people forget that freeze is part of this. When you go into that piece, obviously your heart rate goes up, your blood moves out of your digestive tract into your limbs so you can handle whatever situation. Maybe you'll freeze for a minute, but you might need to run in a second later. So your body is just like ready in this action mode. Most people are stuck being in sympathetic more of the time these days. When you're in sympathetic, you are in a stressed out state. Your cortisol goes up, your adrenaline goes up, and your body is just like ready for action. So what I find really interesting about the difference between these two is that people are stuck so much in the sympathetic. And when that's happening, if they sit down to eat a meal and they're still in sympathetic, they're still in that state of fight, flight, or freeze, they're not going to digest their food. So, when you're talking about like digestive health, digestive impairment, malnourishment, any of these things that people are experiencing, why are people struggling with digestion? Well, if they can't get into a parasympathetic state where all the blood leaves the limbs, it goes into the digestive tract, it allows all these little things to happen, then they're not going to absorb their food very well. I mean, it's as simple as that. There's less oxygen. There's less metabolic reactions that will happen. So it's very important that people learn how to switch back and forth between parasympathetic and sympathetic. You don't need to just be in this like chilled out, relaxed mode all the time. You can absolutely go into a sympathetic state. It's healthy, it's good for you, but you need to be able to get out of it easily. And what do I think is the number one cause of people being tired and exhausted? It's because of this. They don't know how to get into that parasympathetic state. They don't spend any time there. They're not sleeping well because they can't. Their adrenaline's up, their cortisol's up, they can't sleep well. Their insulin's off because of that. So they're having blood sugar dips in the middle of the night and having to wake up because their body's freaking out and saying, hey, emergency, I need you to wake up. You need to put some fuel in. There's all these sorts of imbalances happening on a chemical level. And this is purely from just an imbalance in people's ability to navigate these two different states.
So the sympathetic nervous system is triggered by everything from a door slamming to a lion jumping out. I mean, historically, that sympathetic nervous system was meant to protect us from really acute and proximate dangers. The challenge for our nervous system is it doesn't have eyes to the outside world. And so it can't differentiate literally a lion jumping out from behind the bush and an aggressive email from your boss. It's the same physiological response. And so we really live in an era where we are having these unprecedented number of triggers on our nervous system to move us into that sympathetic state. So I suspect that never before have we had to drive so much conscious energy towards moving us into a parasympathetic state, because I think never before have we had so many things trying to keep us in that place of sympathetic tone. Our nervous system literally feels like it needs to protect us, in some cases all day long.
The brain, when it also has oxytocin, which is another chemical that we spend a lot of time researching, it's a bonding chemical, there's a shift a little bit more towards patterns of what we might call tend or befriend. And so a lot of people in this situation, if their brain is in a state where they have oxytocin, more often we're seeing these with women who are dealing with stress, is they're going to want to reach out to other people, take care of other people, or have a conversation and, build relationships with people, all of which make perfect sense for recharging the battery and dealing with the circumstances that might be causing stress. But each of these patterns, if we don't actually mobilize them for how they're intended, can turn against us. If we're embodying fight or flight, we see a lot of inflammation, we see a lot of brain hijack. There's this high energy state that starts to turn into anxiety over time. If we're not really listening to freeze or faint and resting and recharging and taking care of ourselves, nourishing ourselves, then we can see that lead to patterns like depression. And even with tend and befriend, if we're so focused on everybody else and taking care of everybody else, a lot of times people can find themselves really depleted and overly caring or overly focusing on the people in their environment.
We all experience stress every single day. This triggers our fight, flight, or freeze response, which can affect our hormones. But which ones are most affected?
There's two really important hormones for us to take into consideration when it comes to our health and overall energy and vitality. The first one is cortisol, and the second one is insulin. So cortisol's main function in our physiology is actually to raise blood sugar. That's what it's designed to do. It has other effects on our body, but its main function is to raise blood sugar. So how we regulate blood sugar is very, very important. Stress will always raise blood sugar. Very interesting when I have people wear a continuous glucose monitor, how stressful events in their day will actually cause spikes in their blood sugar. And once they get to see that and they start to see how much their cortisol goes up every time they have a stressful event in their day, they start managing their stress a little bit better. So one way to measure somebody's stress levels is to look at a continuous glucose monitor to see how their day proceeds and how much their blood sugar goes up and down throughout the day. I also want people to know about their insulin levels. Insulin is that second hormone that's really important. When cortisol goes up, our blood sugar goes up, our insulin production tends to increase, but cortisol also increases or decreases insulin receptor sensitivity, so we actually create a state of insulin resistance. Just like you can become insulin resistant, eventually the body can also become cortisol resistant. And so over time, we have to make more cortisol and more insulin to get the same blood sugar regulating response. If we can regulate these two hormones, which is a very fine balancing act, because this is regulating stress, this is regulating diet, this is regulating sleep. This is regulating how much time we spend in nature. This is regulating, what we do for a living and how much we live on purpose. So a lot of things will affect cortisol, but cortisol ultimately is the hormone that we want to have control over. And so stress is, there's internal stresses that we have that are a lot of times emotional. They could be chemical, they could be, toxins, but we also have a lot of external stressors. And the external stressors are things that we can change how we feel about. We can't change the stressor itself, but we can change how we feel about the stressor. And so a lot of times reconditioning how people view the world, their worldview, whether it's an abundance mindset or a scarcity mindset, these things can impact our overall health and our physiology and our chemistry, which ultimately impacts our energy, which ultimately impacts our cortisol levels, which then ultimately impacts the state of our nervous system, which then impacts, our immune system, digestive system, healing, repair. All those things are regulated by that. So it's important for people to realize their thoughts matter, their perception of their environment matters, their past beliefs and their values and traumas matter, because it all relates to how our body regulates healing, repair, and energy utilization.
What if you've been in a sympathetic state most of your life? What if you had just like a tumultuous childhood or some sort of trauma happened that you never got over, which happens for people. I do believe that emotional trauma has a big play in stress. When people have not dealt with their trauma, it gets stuck in the nervous system, and they may even stay in a state of post-traumatic stress disorder on the extreme end, or just a very hyper-vigilant mode where they can't ever just chill out and relax because they're constantly waiting to try to make sure that thing doesn't happen again. It's like they have one eye open all the time, even when they're asleep. And so sadly, these people are, they're not able to break down those hormones very easily. They get stuck in this state. They develop insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes eventually, and end up completely out of whack metabolically.
So when we're talking about insulin, the more insulin we make, the more weight we gain, the higher our cholesterol gets, the higher our blood pressure gets, the lower our hormone production, our sex hormone production gets, the higher our risk for cancer gets. And so basically all the things that we don't want require our body to make, or are a result of our body making more insulin than normal. So insulin will carry out those functions in the body regardless of what creates the state of high insulin. So it could be diet, or it could be chronic low-grade stress, or mid-range stress, or even high levels of stress chronically will create insulin resistance. The more insulin our body makes, the more we increase our risk for chronic disease and illness. So for a lot of people, we need to unpackage all of that insulin resistance, unpackage the cortisol resistance, and now their body needs to make less to get the same response. And so the decreased production of both cortisol and insulin by increasing efficiencies in the body makes a huge difference for somebody's overall health and energy levels.
When you have trauma, when you're exposed to trauma on a daily basis, when you've had childhood trauma, when you constantly feel overwhelmed, the biochemistry of the body does shift. So if there's a child that experiences trauma, it makes up a meaning and a belief to match that. Like, let's say perfectionism is the belief, I need to be perfect in order to survive, or I need to be perfect to be loved or good enough or feel worthy. Then that childhood belief system goes into adulthood and informs the way the adult acts out their life script. And that will create lots and lots of opportunities to feel worthless and not good enough. And every time that button is pushed, then what happens is everything starts from the mind. So perceptions of reality. So if you perceive yourself as not good enough, or being rejected, or feeling betrayed, that's going to be felt as a trauma in the body, because the neurochemistry will then alert the body that you're now in danger. If a zebra is being chased by a lion and is afraid it's about to get eaten for dinner, then that zebra knows it's not safe to reproduce. Can't even keep you alive. Why is it going to stop and have sex right now when there's a lion on its tail? So all of the hormones responsible for reproduction are going to go away, and we always know that survival will win over reproduction. So those little adrenal glands that are responsible for the fight or flight will steal from testicular hormones or ovarian hormones, and then there won't be anything left over for that. Once those are emptied out and there's cortisol flattening, then we wind up with an extreme hormone imbalance, which will then also create pancreatic problems like insulin resistance and eventually diabetes, thyroid imbalances. So the whole thing that moves from the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the adrenal glands and the pancreas and the ovaries and testes is actually very real and very physical. That does have to be repaired. But, you know, I do give bioidentical hormones, and I also say we have to repair the hole in the bucket, because I can't just be giving you stuff to put in the top of it and have it draining out the bottom, because you're perceiving yourself as in danger constantly. So that also has to be fixed. We try very hard in our culture to separate the mind from the body, and it just doesn't work.
As soon as we're actually able to take in these stresses and shift our perspective on those, we have a much easier time moving over into that parasympathetic state. If all you hear is bad news all day long, it's much more difficult to move into that parasympathetic state. If what you hear all day long is good news, if your attitude and positivity and your capacity to take any piece of information, whether that is a news article or that is something on your phone, or it's a supplement, or it's food, it's all information. And your capacity to take information in and shift it to the positive has a huge ability to be able to start to move your nervous system over to that parasympathetic state. That's where we rest. That's where we digest. That's where we actually assimilate all of the energy that we need in our body. So it has a huge role to play in terms of actually being able to make our energy self-sustaining, as opposed to being constantly depleted to be able to address that state of stress.
I think there is more exhaustion and fatigue than there has been in the past. There's a culture of trauma we live in today. It's always humming in the background. There's more political division, gender division, socioeconomic division. There's a lot of polarity going on, polarization in our culture. And I think people are really feeling the constant tug to be on that hamster wheel, to make more money, to be achieving, to be we're very productivity oriented and positively reinforced productivity orientation, and not the breath in between, where a lot of women come into my clinic and they're asking for hormones. I want bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. I hear you prescribe it. You gave it to my mother, my sister, my daughter, and they look fabulous, and I want some of that. And when I start asking really simple questions, then so why do you think you need hormones? Well, I'm exhausted. Do you build in time for self-care? You're moving into menopause. Are you considering menopause like there should be a pause in there? Is there a space where you're considering that maybe this is a time of life to start to slow down a little bit and put some pauses, and to really conceptualize, what do you want in the next stage of your life? What's the legacy you want to bring? What is it that you want to envision for your next stage of life? That's not happening. It's not encouraged. It's not reinforced. The rites of passage in our culture are missing. And I think that's causing trauma, to not have them in place. We're not marking the stages of life in a ritual, sacred manner, the way it used to happen in the past. Even cultures like, let's say religions like Judaism, that have that in place, it's shifting, the flavor of it shifting from what I've observed. So I think that lack of rites of passage is causing a lot of trauma and a lot of fatigue and a lot of exhaustion, because we're chasing and we don't have those elders in place with mentorship about what it looks like to live into the next stage of life.
When things are working well, a little bit of stress can drive us to grow and better ourselves. Hans Selye called that eustress, or positive stress. Distress is when it carries a negative impact. When we're overwhelmed by negative stress, things can take a wrong turn, leading to fatigue, infertility, weight gain, and so many other problems. Here are some of the main points to remember from this segment. The sympathetic nervous system leads to fight, flight, or freeze. Our primary stress responses are fight or flight, which uses adrenaline primarily, and freeze or faint, which primarily uses cortisol. Long-term stress tends to tax cortisol production. The parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and digest nervous system. Higher insulin levels lead to higher risk of cancer, higher blood pressure, weight gain, and much more. Insulin levels get disrupted with higher cortisol and blood sugar swings. Our survival instinct will subvert procreation, so stress hormones rob from our sex hormones.
At this point, it's clear that the adrenal glands play a major role in energy levels and that we need to take good care of them if we want to feel well.
And if we don't take good care of them, well, we've heard all about the fallout.
Endocrine dysregulation leads to hormonal problems, insulin issues, inflammation, and a whole host of things that we don't want in life.
Add in life stressors and dramas, and it's really hard to catch our breath. Hard for the body to stay in the sweet spot of homeostasis.
This dysregulation begins to snowball into a cascade of metabolic issues that lead to real disease. Fatigue and exhaustion are often an early indicator that things are headed south.
We've learned a lot about what drains our adrenals so far, but how about what we can do to bring them back to health? Every day of our lives is a chance to turn things around and start working toward more vitality. The good news is that we have lots of options to help us turn this ship around. You may feel down and out right now, but there's hope on the horizon for you. Pedram is now going to lead us into our next segment on adrenal health.
Getting clear on what damages our adrenals is half the battle because, let's face it, we've all lived our lives and have already done some damage. The challenge with that is because we're already tired, we lack the motivation and mental clarity to fix things. It may feel daunting, but the only way out is in. I promise you that having seen thousands of patients in my clinics and having interviewed the world's leading experts on the subject, that doing the same thing you've been doing and hoping things will change is not the solution. Stopping the bleeding is a start, but now let's get into strategies around care, support, and healing of the adrenals.
The adrenal glands are really responsible for, among many things, managing our stress hormones. They are involved in the pathways of, are we in a fight or flight and danger situation, or are we in a long-term stress situation? And so the adrenal glands are really triggered when we are under constant ongoing stress. And again, they can't see out. So they can't differentiate whether we are on a pilgrimage with our tribe and we are lacking water, or whether we have a really hard deadline in another 10 days. And so they have the same physiological output. And so what we see clinically is something that we term adrenal insufficiency, where those adrenal glands have been pushing for so long and so hard that they finally reach a place where they go, I cannot output at this level. And the body's smart. When the body can't output at a certain level anymore, what it does is it rallies the troops and it goes, okay, well, let's start to compensate. This person still has to keep going. It pulls the thyroid into play. It pulls on other energy reserves. We have a higher desire for fat uptake. We see changes in women's menstrual cycles as a result. It goes all hands on deck. This person needs to keep going. And so what happens is the adrenals at first adapt. They have a lot of energy. And then suddenly those adrenal glands go, listen, like, we're out. I can't do it anymore. And what a lot of people feel is as we're looking at that adaptation to stress or that adaptation to fatigue, at first they were wired and tired, where literally they just couldn't go to bed. They couldn't turn their head off, but they knew they were exhausted. And then they get to a place where they're just tired. They can't recover. There's not enough sleep that can get them where they need to go. And that's usually where we've seen those adrenals just reach this point where they actually can't output the cortisol that we need on a daily basis. There should be a really beautiful curve that we see with respect to the hormones that are produced by the adrenal glands on a daily basis. And when we push and push and push and push, the body goes, listen, I can't do it in this capacity anymore. And so for me as a clinician, I work with entrepreneurs. Adrenal insufficiency is something that we absolutely see in epidemic levels in our population, mostly because people have not been taught how to respect and how to get their body to actually recover. We have so many demands on it. And so once we get them recovered, then we start to shift our lifestyle, our perspective, our recovery so that it doesn't happen again.
And our adrenals, they sit on top of the kidneys and they make these
basically they're energy creating hormones. And so with our cortisol, what happens is we have a nice boost of cortisol in the mornings that helps us get up in the morning and get through our day. And then cortisol gradually drops and lowers ideally at the end of the day so that we can transition into sleep. But unfortunately, what happens with people is that over time, with stress, with taking certain medications, with certain health issues, then the adrenals can stop working the way they're supposed to. And so what will happen sometimes is the cortisol in the morning that gives us that energy boost will be low. So the adrenals won't create that cortisol that we need in the morning to get us going. And then if it continues, oftentimes what I'll see with my patients is it starts to go flat throughout the day and then maybe even go up at night rather than going down. And what that creates is then difficulties with sleep. People can't sleep when they've got those adrenal issues going on.
Hormonal, thyroid, and adrenal glands are so important in the energy of your body, and I see them out of balance a lot of times in practice. A lot of times it's from different things, from chemicals coming in at the body, toxins that we're lathering our body with, food that isn't so nourishing and is rather inflammatory instead, as well as stress levels. So when somebody is having hormonal, thyroid, adrenal gland dysfunction, a lot of times I see them fatigued and gain weight. And they turn to exercise to help address those things. Now, exercise is amazing. I love exercise. But if you are in a constant state of severe fatigue, exhaustion, your body has no energy at all, it doesn't have enough energy to recuperate from the stresses of exercise. So I actually recommend them to practice some lower impact things, yoga, take a walk, go for a swim, take a bike ride with the kids, something you really enjoy to do, so that we can start to regulate those hormonal glands, lose the weight, boost the energy, and feel amazing.
It's our lifestyle that starts to really tax the adrenals. And stress plays a big role in that, and our lifestyle, not taking time to manage stress. We all have stress. It's a normal part of life. And our adrenals do a great job in helping us respond to stress. So it's normal. But when we don't take time for taking breaks, when we have constant stress, repetitive stress, high stress on an ongoing basis, that's really when it starts to play a role. And then if you combine that with taking certain medications that put an additional burden on the adrenals, environmental toxins also play a really big role in that, because if we look at environmental toxins in the environment, a lot of them have endocrine disrupting effects. And so they can actually create havoc for our adrenals, our thyroid, a lot of the different hormones. And so adrenals can, our adrenal system can be really impacted by that.
For someone who's suffering from exhaustion, who's now wondering about their adrenal health, what do they do? Are there recognizable symptoms? Are there tests that they should be looking at? Signs? How do they go about it?
I like to use skin as an indicator of what's going on with the body. It's this, our largest organ, gives us really good indications. So with skin, oftentimes what I notice with low adrenal function is the skin starts to look dry and dull. So you have that kind of lackluster appearance to your skin. So if you have that, especially if you're low morning energy and you have that dry, lackluster skin, that could be a sign of adrenals. And the best way to test for that is to look at a salivary cortisol test. So not all doctors will run that. Sometimes you need a naturopathic physician or functional medicine doctor to run those tests for you, because they're a little bit more specialized testing. And you'll want to do collections throughout the day so that you know what the morning cortisol is, what it is in the afternoon, and then also at the evening, so you can figure out how to support, the practitioner can help support, provide recommendations for adrenal support.
It's easy to go to the store and just pick up an adrenal product, and you don't know, you're assuming, hey, do I have high cortisol or do I have low cortisol? The other thing that's important to know is that fatigue can be a symptom of both high cortisol and low cortisol. Like a lot of times people assume if I'm tired, I must have low cortisol or low adrenaline. And it makes sense. Definitely fatigue happens when those levels are low. But fatigue can also happen when a person has high cortisol. So I really feel like it's important not to assume and not to guess. It's better to measure and then find out exactly what's happening with the cortisol so that you can choose the right herb to help correct for it. And this is pretty amazing, is that the herbs will help bring the cortisol back to where it should be at that time of day. So say we normally have cortisol higher in the morning, so we want to use herbs that will help raise the cortisol in the morning, but we don't want it to go too high either. And same thing at night. We want to, if cortisol is too high at night, which would make it hard for someone to go to sleep, we want to use herbs that bring the cortisol down, but not too far down. So it's all about finding the right herb and the right dose to get the balance back. And that really amazing thing is that I get to see working with patients is that when their cortisol level comes back to optimal, they feel better. And not only do they feel better in terms of their energy, but now, see, cortisol signals everywhere else in the body. Cortisol signals to our digestion, cortisol signals to our immune system, cortisol signals to our nervous system, and all the other hormones in our body, like thyroid and insulin. So if cortisol is either too high or too low, it's going to scramble the signals to those 4 areas. No wonder we start to have digestive issues, frequent infections, anxiety and depression, and hormone imbalances, because if cortisol's not sending the right signal, they're going to be all out of balance too. And so when we can get the cortisol back on track again, it sends the right signal to these other systems. So the fatigue improves, but so does the digestion, so does the immune system, the nervous system, and the hormones. And so that's why someone can start to feel a lot better when we help their adrenals recover from stress.
I think it's an important one to also personalize. Every single thing I think has to be personalized. And so when I do adrenal and hormone testing, I'm looking to see what stage of adrenal fatigue person is in. If they're in the very lowest, most exhausted, cortisol's flatlined on their test results, then doing any kind of cardiovascular strenuous workout is going to make them much worse. So they have to do things like gentle walking, restorative yoga, get out into the woods and just, really enjoy the trees and the soft ground underneath their feet and, do this kind of gentle exercise.
No, a lot of times I see clients push themselves too hard with fitness and exercise, thinking that they're doing a very positive thing. Now, exercise is very positive, but if you are in a fatigued state and your body doesn't have the energy to recuperate from a stressful fitness regimen, it will actually create further imbalance in your body. You'll tank yourself further, sleep will become further harmed, and you'll feel worse.
There's a lot of science that tells us that if we get out into the trees, there's this wonderful reciprocal relationship we have with them. It boosts our mood, it boosts our energy. But then to take a trail run through the trees, right, where you're going uphill for 2 hours and you're in stage 3 adrenal fatigue, that's not going to be good for you. It's going to actually burn you out even further. So if you're in stage 1 adrenal fatigue and your cortisol is peaking very high, actually doing very strenuous trail run or some sort of cardiovascular exercise at the time that's peaking is very good because it'll bring your cortisol down. It's testing, not guessing, and making sure that you're really doing a prescription of exercise that fits the person, and it's not going to be the same forever. It's only going to be in these, you have to come back and then look and see, so how are we doing now, and then adjust.
You see patients for exhaustion, and as we're learning here, it's complicated. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. Can you share a patient story of someone who's exhausted?
I'm thinking of a patient who's a mom. She's a 35-year-old mom who now has 2 children. And after she had her second daughter, she found that she was so fatigued. So she's trying to take care of her children, and she also has a job. So she's trying to do a lot. But she's like, well, I'm trying to figure out why I feel so tired all the time. And I don't have anemia, and I don't have thyroid issues, so why should I feel so tired? And so what we did is we checked her adrenal function. We checked her cortisol levels and her adrenaline levels, and I could see that her cortisol levels are low starting early in the morning, and her adrenaline levels were low. So what I then want to do is I want to support that. And the thing is that a lot of times people want to or choose to support their adrenals using nutrients and herbs, which is wonderful. It's just very important to know that certain herbs will increase cortisol and other herbs decrease cortisol. So you want to make sure you know what your cortisol levels are And if it is low, then choose the herbs that will help the adrenal glands increase the cortisol level, and same with adrenaline, help increase the adrenaline level. And so in her case, that's what we did. We used the right herbs and nutrients to help her body make more cortisol. And within, say, 1 to 2 months, her energy came back up. She's feeling better. She can take care of her kids. She can do her job. And she's not having this feeling like she needs to take a nap partway through the day.
We prescribe botanicals and herbs that will address people's adrenals, for example. So there's some really great botanicals. And the thing I will say with them is everyone is an individual in this capacity. So, as a naturopathic doctor, I have a pharmacopoeia in my brain of 25 different botanicals that we might use depending on someone's unique situation. And so I would preface any mentioning of botanicals with that piece, that they're going to work best when we are actually able to align them with a particular individual. But there's botanicals, there's something called rhodiola, which is actually really great as an adaptogen. It helps to balance out the adrenals. So people who are constantly fatigued, for some people, that's a botanical that's really helpful. There's one called withania. Again, we use this as an adaptogenic herb. It's really helpful when people are facing long-term stresses. It also has some implications, some positive implications when we're working on regulating women's menstrual cycles. There's a lot of nutrients that have roles to play in terms of those adrenal glands. Vitamin B5 is a really critical piece. Vitamin C is really important. So it depends on whether someone's adrenal glands, for example, are underactive or whether they're overactive in terms of how we would put these protocols together. But I actually have seen the best outcomes in being able to support adrenal insufficiency when we're managing someone's lifestyle, but we have a very strategically placed botanical or supplementation protocol alongside.
The good news is that our experts, along with thousands of other natural and functional medicine practitioners, have been treating these issues every day in their clinics. There are tried and true remedies and strategies that have worked for millions of patients and will likely work for you once you dial in a regimen. You simply need to start doing positive things and keep moving along that trajectory. And once you find something that gives you a little boost, a shot in the arm, you take that energy and you keep improving slowly and gradually along an upward spiral of healing and recovery. It may take a while, so you need to be patient and persistent. Keep faith and keep working towards your goal. Here's some of the key things to remember. The adrenal glands manage our stress hormones. Adrenal insufficiency is when the glands can no longer output adrenal hormones at the same level, so the body calls on other systems to make ends meet. The skin starts to look dry and dull with low adrenal or thyroid function. Fatigue can come from both low and high cortisol levels. Fixing the adrenals will correct systemic issues with digestion, immunity, and energy levels all at once. Botanicals are great for balancing hormones, but an individualized regimen is far superior using labs and data. Our experts are helping people out of exhaustion every day of their lives, and we are so blessed to have them. This series gives you unprecedented access to their wisdom and insights. Buying or subscribing to the series right now also gives you access to the full uncut interviews with all of them. This is powerful science, wisdom, and insight, all designed to help you navigate your own challenges and find the right way out. More energy means more life. Please take a moment to purchase the series right now so you can have access to this information and all of the bonus resources available for this limited time. Do this for you. It is time to start the path towards recovery. You deserve to feel better.
It turns out that stress plays a major role in our energy levels, and managing that stress is a matter of life and death in the modern world.
Whether we're working too hard or taking too many stimulants to get through our days, running the adrenals ragged isn't a winning strategy.
Especially knowing what we know about the long-term harmful effects of this lifestyle. It can kill us.
Let's help you find a better way. a way to live a balanced lifestyle that allows your cells to function properly and spin out plenty of energy for you.
We've identified many of the problems and have learned a whole host of remedies so far, and there's much more coming your way.
Our commitment is to cover the topic of exhaustion in a comprehensive manner so you have the best information available to you. Why? Because enough is enough.
You need your life back. We're here to help you get it. We'll see you in the next episode.
Bye for now.